The anime begins with the protagonist, Kelvin, recounting that he died due to a mistake made by a goddess. Because of that, he was given the opportunity to start a new life in another world. The young man tells us that he has already chosen the abilities he wants to have, even though it means he must now lose his former memories. Finally, after a flash of light, we see him arrive in his new world. Upon arrival, he feels confused as he doesn't know where he is due to his memory loss. But suddenly, a floating screen appears in front of him. When he touches the start button, the goddess informs him that he has reincarnated into a new world and explains all that this entails. The goddess goes on to reveal that this world is ruled by swords and magic, and that he now wields the very abilities he handpicked. Next, Kelvin follows the goddess's instructions and manages to view his stats and abilities through the menu. After seeing that he made the right choices, he becomes excited at the prospect of living this adventure as a summoner. Afterward, the goddess tells him he must make his way to the nearby city to register with the Adventurers Guild. With that, the protagonist sets off through the forest, and along the way, he asks the screen whether she'll be accompanying him on his journey. The screen, who introduces herself as Melfina, answers that she will accompany him since he asked her to serve as his attendant. Later, they finally reach the city of Parth, where Kelvin reveals that he learned the truth about his death. It was caused by another god. Before reincarnating, he had asked Melfina, the goddess of reincarnation, to intervene. Despite that, he no longer remembers what she looked like. While they walk through the city, Melfina tells the protagonist about her life. When he sees his reflection in a window, he becomes very happy with his appearance. Melfina tells him that he gave up his memories in exchange for more skill points, and that it was a decision he made on his own. In the next scene, after hearing everything Melfina told him, including that he had fallen in love with her, Kelvin becomes curious. He asks whether he can summon her, but she replies that he can't, as he currently lacks the magical power required. Finally, the two of them arrive at the Adventurers Guild, where the protagonist observes the large number of people looking for jobs. He proceeds to register, filling out the form by himself and revealing that he has the ability of language and writing. But before doing so, Melfina stops him and warns him to think carefully about whether he really wants to register as a summoner. She explains that being a summoner is extremely rare, usually only one exists per country, so if the authorities find out about his identity, the rulers will likely take an interest in him. Kelvin figures that would cause trouble and decides to register as a green mage instead. The receptionist accepts his documents and then hands him an F-rank membership card as he's just enrolling. She explains to the protagonist that adventurer ranks vary by level, with F being the lowest and Cess the highest. She also informs him that, depending on his rank, he may only accept quests that are up to one rank above his current level. However, if he fails a mission, he'll have to pay a penalty. That's why he must be cautious until he completes 10 quests, at which point he'll be eligible for a rank up. Lastly, she tells him that from rank C onwards, he'll have to pass exams to level up. Now Kelvin asks about available F-rank jobs, and upon reviewing the list, Melfina recommends he go hunt blue slimes. After leaving the guild, we see that the protagonist has bought a wooden staff with minor magical power, spending nearly all his money. Later, the protagonist heads to the quest location and arrives at the spot where the slimes are. Kelvin uses his appraisal eye ability to gather information about his targets, preparing to initiate a summoner's pact. Melfina explains that the summoned target must accept the contract. However, when dealing with monsters that can't speak, he must first weaken them in battle without killing them before presenting the contract, which they will instinctively accept. Upon learning this, Kelvin jumps into action, only to find that the monsters are far tougher than he expected, fast, agile, and hard to pin down. Using his wit and speed, Kelvin manages to weaken a slime and attempts to form a summoning pact. To his surprise, he suddenly feels his body grow weaker. Melfina explains that initiating a pact consumes half of his magic points, regardless of whether it succeeds. Fortunately, after a brief moment, the pact is completed successfully. Kelvin names his new summon Clotho. Now bonded with his first summoned creature, Kelvin is surprised to sense Clotho's emotions and realizes that it feels happy. Kelvin decides to summon Clotho for the first time to help him complete the job. Clotho gets excited when he finds out he has to fight and kill other slimes. After all, it's the only way for him to level up. After a bit of searching, they manage to track down the remaining slimes, and Kelvin lays out the plan so they can take them down together. Next, both attack simultaneously, easily defeating their enemies. Kelvin is surprised by Clotho's power, which leads Melfina to reveal that, thanks to his S-rank summoner class, Clotho received a 100-point bonus to all of its stats, making him incredibly strong. Now Kelvin understands why summoners are so highly sought after, and Melfina adds that he is the only S-rank summoner in existence. In the following scene, the protagonist makes their way through town, carrying the reward from the job. While looking for the inn that was recommended to him, Kelvin encounters a slave trader in a hallway who has an elf girl with him. The elf catches Kelvin's attention because she looks very sad. The scene shifts, and the protagonist arrives at the Spiritual Song Inn, where he is greeted by Claire. Kelvin arrives at his room and complains that it doesn't have a bathroom, to which Melfina replies that only the wealthy can afford such a luxury. The protagonist vows that one day he'll live in a place with a proper bath, and then heads out to eat. In the next scene, Kelvin tells us that thanks to his double experience skill, both he and Clotho have leveled up. That's why he decided to learn the camouflage ability, a D rank skill, which he plans to raise to B rank so he can live peacefully. Later, the protagonist heads to the guild, where Anju congratulates him for reaching E rank and admits she's surprised he hasn't formed a party. But Kelvin knows he can't join a group because it would reveal that he's a summoner. However, even though he doesn't want to draw attention, his rapid rank advancement causes other adventurers to start talking about him. Anju even wonders if he might be a court mage from another country who made a mistake, and she asks him about it. The protagonist replies that he can't talk about his past, and then requests her a D-rank job. That's when Cashel interrupts them and suggests that if he wants a D-rank job, he should go fight the Black Ghost Knight. Cashel then congratulates him for ranking up, while proudly boasting about being an experienced adventurer. But the protagonist ignores his greeting and asks who he is. He replies that he's Cashel, a D-rank adventurer, which prompts murmurs among the onlookers. They start whispering that Cashel has the strength of a B rank and is known for enjoying getting rid of newcomers. Cashel, unfazed by the rumors, ignores them and invites the protagonist to join his party to hunt down the Black Ghost Knight. Meanwhile, Anju steps in and warns the protagonist that the knight is stronger than many people, despite being considered a D-rank threat, and that makes him very dangerous. But Kelvin, unconcerned by everyone's worries, tells Cashel he will decline his offer. Then he uses his appraisal eye to check Cashel's stats and discovers that he holds the title of Assassin. Kelvin is alarmed by this, and when he sees that Cashel won't take no for an answer, he decides to propose a competition between them. The protagonist challenges him to see who can defeat the knight first, and adds that he plans to go alone. The D-rank adventurer accepts the challenge and walks away. Our protagonist is pleased to have gotten what he wanted and admits he's curious about Cashel's group. Meanwhile, Cashel approaches one of his team members and asks about the new guy. His teammate, who possesses a C-rank appraisal eye, tells him the kid is very strong. So strong in fact that he can't analyze him. Raj interrupts them and asks Cashel to let him fight the newcomer so he can beat him up like he did the last one. But Cashel refuses and tells them about the challenge Kelvin proposed, which excites both Jimmel and Raj. In the next scene, we're taken to the Castle of Evil Spirits, where Cashel's group is shocked to find all the monsters already dead. Suddenly, the protagonist appears, causing the group to think they figured out what his abilities are. At that moment, Kelvin points them toward the door where the knight is likely waiting. Cashel's group starts mocking him, thinking he's only pointing it out because he knows he can't defeat the knight on his own. However, the protagonist reveals that he's uncovered their plan, and that's why he wants to fight them right now. Jimmel grows worried upon realizing they've been found out and asks the protagonist if he's a bounty hunter. Kelvin is surprised to learn they're wanted men and sarcastically wishes them luck in facing him. The protagonist provokes Raj into attacking, and when the brute gives in to the taunts, he falls right into Kelvin's trap. Cashel and Jimmel are alarmed to see that the protagonist is far stronger than he appears, especially when he unleashes a skill that even Jimmel, who couldn't detect it, fails to recognize. Watching Kelvin's initial attacks, Jimmel decides to flee, suspecting that the rookie is hiding something far more dangerous. Cashel, determined to prove his strength, chooses to stay and fight. Meanwhile, Kelvin sends Clotho, now evolved into a glutton slime, after Jimmel, who panics at the sight. As Jimmel tries to escape, Kelvin recalls how shocked he was just days ago when Clotho evolved into a near-legendary Demon King-class creature. Clotho, for his part, effortlessly defeats his target, which enrages Raj, who manages to break free from Kelvin's trap. But when Raj charges Clotho, the slime easily takes him down. Next, we see Cashel moving in dangerously close to the protagonist, but Kelvin swiftly defeats him, inflicting heavy injuries without breaking a sweat. Kelvin realized that he and his group were hunting adventurers instead of monsters to level up quickly. He decides to scold them and tells them he will take them to the guild. Then he goes to defeat the Black Ghost Knight, whose name is Gerard, and he feels excited imagining him on his team. So instead of attacking, he decides to introduce himself and offer a summoning pact. Gerard receives him friendly because he chose to talk to him, and so he tells him about his life. After chatting for a long while, the protagonist reminds him that he wants to make a pact with him. Gerard thinks it's a good idea to serve another king and proposes that before accepting, Kelvin proves what he is capable of. During the fight, both are surprised to see each other's abilities. Suddenly, due to the pressure of the protagonist's attack, Gerard remembers his past in the country of Alcarl, which was attacked by a nation of elves who defeated them in a few days. For this reason, he had to leave the country since he was taking care of his daughter Connie. Back in the present, Gerard gains more strength as he remembers his desire for revenge, which surprises the protagonist who, together with Clotho, had to use almost all their power to directly attack the knight. The next day, the protagonist goes to the guild to claim his reward, where everyone thanks him for dealing with the knight and the Cashel group, who have also been imprisoned. During the celebrations at the guild, Anju approaches the protagonist to inform him that he'll be given a special promotion. The guild master will thank him personally because he did a very difficult job. As the protagonist goes to see the guild master, we discover that Gerard did accept the pact with Kelvin. Next, the protagonist meets the guild master, Leo, who wants to ask him some questions and suspecting that he might be from another world. But using his keen eye, the protagonist analyzes Leo in return and discovers that he is incredibly powerful. For this reason, Kelvin worries that now Leo truly knows he is a summoner. Then, while they share tea, the protagonist, who is being questioned, thinks he should have been more careful. But Gerard advises him to stay strong and take the opportunity to make friends with people he can trust with his secret. Kelvin decides to follow his advice and praises Leo after asking why he didn't stop Cashel's group earlier. Leo apologizes and explains that Cashel is a noble from the military country of Trison, so he couldn't act hastily without proof. However, he reveals that Cashel was about to do something against him and confesses that he's glad he didn't have to get involved. Now, after hearing this, Kelvin asks him to get straight to the point. The guild master tells him not to see him as an enemy because he actually wants to be his friend. He also says that he had previously met people from another world, which amazes the protagonist that there are more people like him. Leo tells him some of them were the heroes of the sacred empire of Doramus, which reminds Nalfina that she was the one who reincarnated them. The master continues his story, saying that the priestess of the Doramus prophesied that the Demon King was approaching. For that reason, he thinks that now the monsters from all continents are very violent and he wants to focus on defeating them if the Demon King returns. The protagonist asks if he is being asked to protect everyone instead of just the heroes. The guild master replies yes, because there aren't many who can handle rank B or higher jobs. In return, he offers better pay and a rank increase so that he can choose the jobs he prefers. Kelvin is surprised that he wants to give him so many benefits, and then Leo reveals his true intentions. He proceeds to make a subtle threat, saying he will give him all the freedom in the world if he accepts, so he won't have to deal with the nobles. Because of his abilities, Leo promises to take him to the very top before anyone forces him to join another cause. Upon hearing this, the protagonist decides to accept his cooperation proposal. Later, the protagonist returns to the inn, where Claire congratulates him on his promotion to rank B. To celebrate, she tells him she'll be serving an extra side dish with dinner, which fills him with excitement. Meanwhile, Kelvin goes to have lunch in his room and asks Nalfina to tell him the story of the heroes she reincarnated. She tells him that by listening to the priestess, she found suitable people and made them reincarnate in this world, so they must already be at a good level by now. Then she asks him not to get involved, saying the Demon King has nothing to do with him and that she's already tired of dealing with them. However, the protagonist, reminded of the battle with Gerard, gets excited at the thought of heroes and demon kings. He asks Clotho to hand over the reward she stored in her inventory, then heads out to do some shopping. On the way, he reveals that he plans to buy a slave. That surprises his summons, and Kelvin tells Gerard that when he saw the slaver, he thought that a slave Nalfina mentioned would improve his group. The protagonist thinks that if he wants to face more enemies like Gerard, he must gain all the strength he can. He also knows that slaves can't use their skill points without their owner's permission. That's why he needs one without a previous owner, so their points remain unspent. Finally, the protagonist arrives at the slave trader and discovers that the half-elf girl has a curse that burns anyone who touches her. Because of this, he decides to use his keen eye to examine what is happening and realizes that she still has her skill points intact. That's why he asks Nalfina what is needed to break the curse she carries. After learning this, he goes to find someone who can help. Later, he returns and asks the slave trader to sell her to him, which surprises the trader because he could get hurt. However, the protagonist insists and manages to buy the half-elf girl, who, upon leaving the cage, is amazed to see the world. She thanks the protagonist for buying her and introduces herself as Ephil, telling him that she has been a slave for as long as she can remember, having been sold at birth for being cursed. But the protagonist approaches her and heals the curse, causing her to cry with emotion, knowing she will no longer hurt anyone because of it. Kelvin reveals that he used his remaining skill points to learn the rank 8 blessing skill to cure her. That night, the protagonist returns to the inn and asks Claire to get clothes for Ephil after dinner. Claire, annoyed, responds that she will immediately find clothes for her since such a cutie cannot be dressed in rags. Claire then takes her to give her a bath so she can present her properly to the protagonist later. When he sees her, he's stunned by her beauty, leaving Ephil nervous after hearing his reaction. That night, they had dinner together, and the protagonist introduced her to his summons, asking her to keep it a secret. He then showed her his own skills and let her choose a few for herself so she could learn to make decisions. Although everything seemed to be going well, the protagonist ran into a problem. There were no extra beds available, so he had to try sleeping next to her. Now we move to the dark purple forest, 1 month after Ephil joined the protagonist. Kelvin tells us that during this time, they had been working and leveling up, and Ephil spent her points on clairvoyance and sewing, which allowed her to create her own combat-ready maid outfit. While we watch Ephil perform a powerful bow attack, the protagonist explains that she acquired a very strong technique. Later, Kelvin and his companions return to the guild to claim their reward. Andrew tells the protagonist that if he completes one more job, he'll be able to take the exam to become rank A, which makes Ephil very happy. The protagonist congratulates her for reaching rank C and encourages her to keep rising to rank B. He also laughs about what she did during her last rank exam, where she shot the examiner, Erd, in the head with an arrow. Later, Anju tells Ephil about a new candy shop she wants to visit with her. Ephil agrees and invites the protagonist to come along too. The scene changes and we see Kelvin complaining that he somehow just accepted a date, and if Melfina were there, she would probably scold him. He remembers that she left that morning under the excuse of needing to serve as an oracle. Then Anju arrives where the protagonist is waiting and they decide to wait together for Ephil. Suddenly, Ephil shows up, stunning both the protagonist and Anju with her beauty. Later, they all go out for a snack, and Ephil begins acting like a servant, which makes Kelvin uncomfortable. He gently asks her to stop, but when Anju sees Ephil trying to feed him directly, she decides to do the same, leaving Kelvin flustered. Their behavior draws attention from the people around them, who begin to wonder if the three are caught in a love triangle. Upon hearing all the commotion, Kelvin decides they should take the food back to the inn, which causes even more surprise among the onlookers. Suddenly, a noble tells them that Connors shouldn't behave like that in public and proceeds to attack their table. The protagonist, surprised, asks him why he did that, and the noble's guards, serving a man named Tabra, order him to kneel before him. Influenced by his guards, Tabra starts harassing Ephil and demands that they surrender, saying that if they do, he'll forgive their crimes. However, the protagonist uses his power and easily defeats the guards, causing Tabra to tremble in fear. He then decides to interrogate him about his presence in Parth, and when Tabra refuses to answer, Kelvin increases the pressure. Under that pressure, Tabra gives in and explains that he came to see Leo because he heard about a great adventurer living in Parth. The protagonist, surprised, replies that for a prince, his guards are very weak. Tabra explains that in Trison, only the talented rule, and he is not one of them. That's why he needs to find a powerful adventurer to earn glory. Kelvin reveals that he is the great adventurer, and upon hearing this, the prince demands that Kelvin serve him. Despite that, the protagonist punches him and firmly refuses, saying he wouldn't do it even if he were dead. In the next scene, we move to the Cathedral of the Holy Empire of Doremus, where the priestess requests Melfina's presence. When she appears, the first thing Melfina asks about is the heroes. Colette shows her that they are all doing well, and Melfina, upon seeing them, is pleased to know they are developing properly. She then fulfills her role as Oracle by revealing that she senses a dark presence on the western continent. For that reason, the heroes must be sent there, but they must avoid going near Parth. Colette promises to follow her orders and then informs the heroes of what the goddess has said. That night, Ephil thanks the protagonist for saving her, but instead of accepting her gratitude, he apologizes for having slept next to her. Surprised, she asks if he doesn't find her attractive, after hearing that he wants to sleep in a separate bed. Seeing her start to cry, Kelvin gently tells her that she has the right to choose who she shares that with. Ephil then confesses that she loves him not just as her master, but as a man. She loves him more than anyone. Moved by her words, Kelvin tells her she's the most beautiful girl he's ever met, and they share a kiss. The next day, Kelvin and Gerard review the information they have on the heroes. Ephil, like the rest of the group, thinks the heroes aren't very strong since their levels are still low. The protagonist complains, saying he expected them to be at level 100 and wonders what they've been doing all this time. Melfina admits that she's also disappointed and questions whether they'll even be able to defeat the Demon King. Suddenly, they are interrupted by Claire, who is looking for the protagonist because the guild has called for him. Once there, Leo tells him about the appearance of a demon in a hidden chamber inside the D-rank Hermit's cave. Kelvin is surprised that the adventurers who found him even made it back alive, but Leo explains that the demon was sealed, which is why he wants Kelvin to come and see it, since it might be an S-rank demon. After seeing Kelvin hesitate, he adds that a thug recently attacked the Prince of Trison, which could lead to a political conflict. Thanks to Leo's clever manipulation, the protagonist agrees to take the job without hesitation. Finally, the protagonist and his friends arrive at the cave and encounter Instructor Erd along with his group. Erd tells them that they've set up a barrier to monitor the area, though they're unsure if it will work against demons. Kelvin orders him to keep watch while he and his group go in to investigate. The group walks through the cave for quite some time, and with no enemies appearing, the protagonist begins to suspect that something strange is going on. Eventually, they reach a door, and Kelvin senses two life forms inside. Upon entering, they see that the demon seal is still intact, but they also come face to face with their real enemy, the Archdemon Victor. He introduces himself, leaving the protagonist stunned, as an Archdemon is likely ranked higher than B. Kelvin tries to figure out who the girl beside him is, and Victor reveals that she is the daughter of the Demon King. Melfina suspects she is the daughter of Gustav, the last Demon King, and is shocked to learn of her existence, as she had no idea she was even alive. Victor tells them that she was kept secret and confessed to being excited to see such a powerful human. He then reveals that they've walked right into his trap because only humans can break the demon seal. However, he tells them that he doesn't actually want them to break the seal because he plans to eat them and absorb their power instead. Thanks to his skill gluttony, Victor can steal the traits of those he eats. Kelvin assumes that Victor wants to eat them in order to become human and then free the demon girl to become the new Demon King. But Victor tells him he's wrong, that they call him the glutton, and his real goal is to devour the sealed demon. Because of their connection, doing so would amplify his gluttony ability and boost his power to the level of a new Demon King. The protagonist, on the other hand, becomes excited at the prospect of fighting someone with such power. The Archdemon finds Kelvin's reaction fascinating and says he wants to show him something he'll enjoy. Victor uses his dark magic to summon the Hades army, resurrecting the dead within the area. The Hades army charges at the protagonist, but they are quickly defeated. Gerard rushes into the remaining enemies and asks Kelvin to cover him against any stragglers. Seeing how his army is so easily overwhelmed, the Archdemon is captivated by the way Kelvin's group fights and admits that, from the start, he suspected Kelvin was a battle addict. With a smile on his face, Kelvin confirms Victor's suspicion and admits that he can't control himself. But Victor promises to wipe that smile off his face and, using a smoke distraction, launches his attack. The protagonist manages to sense him and gives Gerard instructions to defend himself, which surprises Victor. Still, he succeeds in landing a hit on Gerard, leaving Kelvin astonished by the armor's ability to cut physical damage in half. Victor strikes again, this time giving Kelvin no chance to detect his movements. Realizing he's in danger, Kelvin orders Clotho to attack, knowing that physical attacks won't affect him. However, even when the protagonist and Gerard combine their attacks, the Archdemon proves to be both stronger and more cunning, managing to break free. But just when Victor thinks he's about to win, Kelvin commands Eiffel to attack, catching him off guard because he had failed to detect her camouflage. To block Eiffel's flaming arrow, Victor is forced to sacrifice his arm. This creates the opening Gerard needs to land a direct blow and sever Victor's other arm. The Archdemon is left fascinated that they were able to deal him so much damage. But with a smile, Victor tells them the real fight is only just beginning. He then reveals his true power by beginning to chant a spell. Realizing the danger, Kelvin quickly orders his companions to strike before Victor can finish the incantation. But they're too late, and Victor unleashes a devastating attack. However, the protagonist commands Gerard to use all his power to defend the team and buy some time. Victor breaks through the knight's defense, and just as he's about to finish him off, Eiffel strikes to support her teammate. The Archdemon manages to stop them and prepares for another powerful blow. Seeing this, Kelvin declares that he's certain they'll win and commands Clotho to attack. The slime unleashes all the cursed weapons Kelvin had been crafting with his skill, buying time for the rest of the group. Finally, with a combined assault, the group manages to weaken the Archdemon. With his last breath, Victor sees that the Demon King's daughter is about to die, and he sacrifices himself to shield her. The protagonist approaches Victor and asks why he lied about wanting to eat Gustav's daughter. Victor explains that he lied so Kelvin would fight with all his strength. He then confesses that Gustav entrusted the girl to him. Next, we see a flashback. Victor was the one responsible for training Sarah. But one day, a hero attacked the mansion searching for Gustav. That's when Gustav ordered Victor to protect his daughter, Sarah. Gustav decided that in order to keep her safe, she had to be sealed, and only humans could break the seal because, unlike other species, humans are weak. That way, if someone other than the hero found her, she'd still be safe. Victor explains that when Gustav died, his magic activated and transported Sarah to a distant land where she could live in peace. That's why she was hidden in this place, waiting for the hero to fall, because Gustav intended to release her in an era of peace and harmony, where she could rise as the new Demon King. Now, accepting his failure, the Archdemon makes a final request. He asks Kelvin to let Sarah join his group. He suggests breaking the chains to wake her up, as she's surely listening to their conversation. Kelvin decides to grant his request and breaks the seal to awaken Sarah. Upon waking, Sarah complains about what her father and Victor did. Finally, the protagonist returns to Erd and informs him that the demon has been dealt with. notices the girl on his back and asks about her. Kelvin explains that she was the one the demon had possessed when it was sealed. To help her blend in, they use a special hairpin Gustav had made to conceal her wings and horns. He then tells that the girl needs rest, so they have to leave. Later, it's revealed that Gerard had been acting strangely because he was on the verge of evolving. Melfina tells the protagonist that the knight has transformed into a dark captain, an extremely powerful S-rank monster. In the next scene, the protagonist approaches Sarah to check how she's doing. A bit calmer now, she asks him if he truly wants the daughter of the Demon King as a servant, since it could be troublesome. But the protagonist reassures her, saying he has camouflage at S-rank, so no one will be able to discover her identity. Still surprised that he managed to defeat Victor, Sarah asks if he is actually the hero. The protagonist replies that he's not. He's just an adventurer who enjoys fighting. Then he invites her to come with him to the city. But Sarah is scared because she has never left the mansion, so the others encourage her. We then see them arrive at the city of Parth, which Sarah finds fascinating. The protagonist and his group tell her about the different shops in the area. Next, the protagonist instructs Eiffel to take her to the inn while he goes to report to the guild. At night, we discover that the protagonist is already A rank, and because of that, when he returns to the inn, a surprise party is waiting for him. There, he also finds out that is married to Claire. But after the party, while everyone is sleeping, he notices that Sarah is missing and decides to go look for her. When he finds her, he sees her sitting outside, remembering her life with Victor and imagining her new future. The next day, the protagonist is happy that his blacksmithing skill has reached S rank, just like Eifel's sewing skill. He wants to reveal his new creations to everyone. First, the weapon Arondite for Sarah, along with her armor Queen's Terror. Then, for Gerard, the magic sword Dainsleif, which he gratefully receives. But now Sarah wants to know what kind of equipment the protagonist and Eiffel will use. Kelvin replies that she'll find out when it's time to fight. Right now, he just wants to eat and sleep. Eiffel offers to cook something for him, and the protagonist asks her to make rice. However, no one knows what that means, and as they watch him beg for rice, they start to think he's gone crazy. Later, we see the group traveling toward Torridge, and Sarah is excited by all the new things she sees along the way. The protagonist tells Eiffel that this trip is also meant to fulfill the promise he made to Victor, to show Sarah the world. But he also wants to visit this country because it has a lot of rice. Kelvin is surprised that Leo gave them permission to travel without needing much convincing. He also explains that he still can't summon Melfina, so she decided to take a vacation to train her avatars. If everything goes well, the protagonist will eventually be able to summon her, and before leaving, he promised to create a body for her identical to her current form so she could fall in love with herself. During the trip, Sarah asks the protagonist about the people who are secretly watching them. Kelvin simply replies that he's already aware of them and doesn't give it much importance. But suddenly, a girl steps in front of the carriage and stops it. Then, a group of people tries to rob them. The girl introduces the group as the infamous Dark Wind Bandit, which terrifies the coachman. However, after checking their stats, the protagonist is disappointed to see how weak they are and orders Sarah to deal with them. She steps off the carriage and stands in front of the bandits, who begin to mock her. But when they try to attack her, she easily defeats them and complains that she thought she was holding back. The leader of the bandits refuses to accept defeat and still believes they can overpower Sarah. That's when Gilda, a man with over 200 strength, steps in to attack her, but she stops him with just one hand. Now, the leader finally begins to feel true fear and surrenders to Sarah. While being restrained, she warns them not to celebrate too early, claiming their boss is level 70. Hearing this, the protagonist becomes interested and asks the bandit for more information about their leader. They finally arrive at the water nation, Torridge, and the protagonist notices it resembles ancient Japan. Meanwhile, Sarah and Eiffel are amazed to see the ocean for the first time. Following her dream, Sarah asks the protagonist to teach both of them how to swim. He promises to do so, but laments that they caught the bandits. Otherwise, they could have stayed at the beach a bit longer. Later, we see the group turning the bandits over to the city's guild, where they are thanked for capturing one of the bandit leaders. The guild master, a woman named Mist, personally thanks them and reveals that Leo had already told her about them. Mist tells Kelvin that 20 years ago, she was part of the same party as Leo, who was known back then as the Analyst. After hearing her story, the protagonist says he wants to talk about Dark Wind. Mist admits she's surprised that the ones who took down the bandits are now standing in front of her, and the protagonist shares his suspicion that someone named Kristoff, a well-known warrior from Tryson, might be behind it all, and confirms it is indeed Kristoff, who now kidnaps people and sells them into slavery. Sarah gets angry upon hearing this and says that if they knew where Kristoff was, they could easily take him down. The guild master reveals that she knows he's currently in Torridge and is considered a national hero, which makes it hard to take action against him. She warns them that if they're not careful, a conflict between Torridge and Tryson could break out. But the protagonist, while trying to calm Sarah down, thinks to himself that Kristoff is only level 70 and laughs at him. Kelvin complains about having to get involved, but suddenly comes up with an idea. He asks Sarah if she can spot 4 strong adventurers, and when she says yes, the protagonist turns to Mist and tells her that the heroes will take care of Kristoff and his gang. In the next scene, we see Mist informing Tuya that they need his help with the bandits in the area. Tuya considers accepting the request, but his companions stop him, not wanting to waste time. However, he reminds them that there are people who need a hero's strength. Meanwhile, Hope is in his hideout, cleaning his knife while singing a song. Then Hope goes to choose one of his slaves, a girl named Luca, to take with him. But suddenly, he's interrupted by the protagonist and his companions, who have managed to track him down. Hope recognizes them as the warriors who defeated his comrade Karna and prepares to attack. However, before he can make a move, Gerard defeats him easily. In the next scene, Kristoff is being scolded for interrupting Prizra's rest. He informs her that Karna was defeated, which annoys Prizra, as it might expose their operations to other nations. Kristoff explains that he sent Hope to investigate, so they should soon find out what's going on. Suddenly, the door to the room bursts open with a loud bang, revealing Hope's unconscious body. Next, the protagonist and his group burst into the room, surprising the bandits, who ask who they are. The protagonist, unaware that he's already facing him, asks to see Kristoff. The bandit, realizing they are the ones who defeated Karna, gets excited about the upcoming battle. However, Kelvin tells him he's not the one he's after. He's just the appetizer before the main course. The scene shifts, and we see the heroes entering the bandits' hideout. One of them is worried because they don't see anyone around, even though Mist said she had sent A-rank adventurers. Toya then asks Setsuna to use her perception skill to try to locate someone. Setsuna informs them that a large group of people is gathered ahead. Hearing this, Toya tells her to lead the way, convinced they'll find captives there. They finally arrive at a door, unsure of what's on the other side. When the heroes step through, they find themselves face to face with Clotho, the giant slime, and they mistakenly believe he's holding people hostage. Toya prepares to attack using his holy sword, but before he can strike, Luca stops them. The little girl tells them that Clotho is the pet of the man who saved them, surprising the group. Then Nana approaches the slime to talk to him and discovers that he was ordered to guard the people. Toya is surprised to learn that the previous group had a tamer, as it's something quite unusual. Later, we see the heroes rushing to find the A-rank adventurers, since Luca's mother told them they needed help because many bandits are still loose, and their leaders are strong and experienced. However, when they arrive, they find Kristoff and his group already defeated, leading them to believe they'd come too late. Just then, a noise from the next room catches their attention. When they go to check it out, they find the protagonist and his party calmly waiting for them. Upon seeing them, Kelvin mocks Kristoff and his companions, calling them pathetic for begging for their lives after just one hit. The heroes then step forward and introduce themselves to the protagonist, declaring it's their duty to protect the people from criminals. But Kelvin, fully embracing his role as the villain, laughs and tells them that to protect others, they'll first need to become stronger. After provoking Toya, he proposes a challenge, the 4 of them against him, on one condition: the loser must grant the winner a single wish. However, the heroes believe they have the advantage and refuse to accept this kind of battle, as Toya thinks it's cowardly to fight that way. He proposes a one-on-one duel, but Setsuna stops him, sensing that the protagonist is plotting something. Setsuna suggests that they all fight him together, and Miyabi agrees since she believes he has more magical power than she does. Now, after hearing his teammates' opinions, Toya informs the protagonist that he accepts his challenge. In the next scene, everyone moves to a more suitable place for the fight. The protagonist confesses to his companions that he can't believe his plan is going so smoothly and feels happy that the heroes are so foolish. He then orders Ifil to bring out the tray of food so they can enjoy it while watching the battle. Ifil follows his orders but then confesses that she thinks it's dangerous for him to face the heroes alone, since he's not used to fighting on the front lines. But Kelvin tells them that he wants to take this opportunity to train one of his weaknesses, fighting against groups, and reveals that he will use the weapon he crafted for himself, which he named Skill Eater. Meanwhile, the heroes watch him closely, convinced that he's a bad person and that they must not lose. Now the heroes prepare to fight and decide to invoke the power of the fairy's blessing. Then Toya charges at the protagonist, trying to take advantage of the fact that he's a mage. However, Kelvin surprises them by approaching, showing that he's not just a mage. Nana tries to attack using her dragon familiar, named Mun, who breathes fire. The protagonist dodges the attack and boosts his agility stat, appearing behind Miyabi. Kelvin then uses his special weapon, crafted from Victor's armor, to copy her parallel thought skill. The heroes panic when they see Miyabi collapse and immediately rush to her side. Toya attacks Kelvin with his sword to drive him away and demands to know what he did to his friend. Furious, Toya charges at him again, trying to strike him down, but Kelvin easily blocks the attack and continues provoking the hero, trying to make him lose his composure. Toya Toya manages to knock the protagonist's sword away and gets ready to finish him off, but Kelvin laughs, showing that he can fight with his fists too. That's when we discover that he's able to do so thanks to Sarah, who lent him her S-rank close combat skill. Setsuna can't believe Toya is being overwhelmed, even though he possesses S-rank swordsmanship, and decides to assist him. So the protagonist backs away from Toya and uses magic to alter the battlefield. Huge walls of rock rise up, but Setsuna uses her Zantetsu ability to cut them down. Kelvin is thrilled to see her destroy the wall, since he only used it as a distraction. Then the protagonist throws a magic attack that hits Toya directly as he tries to protect Setsuna. Seeing him injured, his companions grow concerned, but Toya tells them that his destiny is to save the world and bring peace, and that he should be able to defeat a mere thug on his own. But Setsuna, crying, punches him and begs him to think about himself for once. Then Setsuna reminds Toya that the goddess brought them here in response to Priestess Colette's summoning. She admits she was terrified at first, but everything changed when she saw how far they'd come through their teamwork. Her words move the rest of the girls, and they tell Toya that they should work better as a team, since he can't do everything alone. Toya, hearing what they say, apologizes for not thinking clearly and encourages them to fight together as a team. Afterward, he sends out a fairy to try and blind the protagonist, who then reveals that he can't detect the fairies. The heroes launch a series of combined attacks, managing to immobilize him, but Kelvin decides to self-detonate, blasting Toya and Setsuna away and injuring them in the process. After breaking free, he praises their teamwork and tells them to have Nana or Miyabi join the attack as well. Kelvin continues offering corrections, and the heroes, stunned, begin to realize the so-called villain is actually giving them advice. But instead of calming down, his words only make them angrier, and they attack with full force, causing the protagonist to get excited. Their coordinated assault ends up locking down Kelvin's movements, and now he watches as they prepare to strike the final blow. However, the protagonist summons his golems to protect him for 30 seconds, astonishing the heroes. Taking advantage of that time, he focuses on creating a new spell using his parallel thinking ability. Setsuna rushes to stop him but fails, and Kelvin successfully completes the spell and breaks free. Despite the setback, Setsuna refuses to give up and attacks again, earning praise from the protagonist, who tells her she's the best fighter in the group. However, after complimenting her, he proves he's still faster, prompting Miyabi to intervene with a powerful strike from her ogre, but she too is easily defeated. Seeing this, Nana asks Toya to attack while she covers him. She charges forward with her dragon and uses a protective barrier. Kelvin, upon seeing her defense, compares it to Sarah's and decides to trap her within a magical barrier, making her defeat easier. This enrages Toya, who attacks Kelvin with everything he's got, demanding to know why he doesn't use all his power to do good. But the protagonist easily defeats him and scolds him for trying to force his ideals on others. He tells him that if he truly wants to change the world, the best way is to become stronger. Later on, we see Toya finally waking up, surrounded by his companions, and then, seeing the protagonist, Toya tries to attack him, but Kelvin stops him and explains what really happened. Realizing it was all a setup, Toya apologizes to the protagonist and admits that he is a better fighter than their entire group. Kelvin laughs and tells him that, as a reward for his victory, they all have to strip naked. In the next scene, we see Mist informing the protagonist that she will take care of all the people he rescued. She also tells him that she will interrogate Kristoff and his group, who are now in prison, to uncover their connections with Trison. Now we shift back to the heroes, who are facing off against an Octogen inside a cave as part of a training exercise set up by the protagonist. Setsuna warns Toya to be careful because the monster is building up electricity. Trying to avoid a catastrophe, the protagonist asks Nana and Miyabi to stay alert in case they need to turn the surrounding water into ice. As Kelvin watches the heroes, Sarah approaches him and asks why he decided to train the kids. The protagonist responds that there wasn't any particular reason. He simply did it because they are the heroes Nulthina chose. Frustrated, Sarah says she thought the whole point was to train them for a rematch. Kelvin hears this and agrees, saying it's actually a great idea. At last, the heroes manage to defeat the Octogen, and the protagonist announces it's time to eat. During the meal, Setsuna mentions to Toya that dungeon bosses grow stronger while the Demon King is alive. Toya agrees, adding that it's exactly what Colette had told them. The moment he says her name, Kelvin's interest is piqued, and he asks about her, prompting Toya to recount the day they were summoned. The protagonist, hearing this, thinks about how they changed worlds without dying and thinks he understands how it works. But then he changes the topic of conversation and asks her what they will do if they find an S-rank boss. Toya replies that they would run away. Suddenly, we see how Sarah was fishing and accidentally woke up the dungeon boss, a rank S sinister dragon. Kelvin asks Toya if they are going to run away, leaving the people in the area to suffer because of the dragon. While Sarah takes care of the monster, Toya tells the protagonist that he would run away no matter how much they call him a coward. Since he doesn't intend to let his companions die in vain, he would first make a plan to train until he is ready to fight. Kelvin smiles and tells him that he passed the test, so he shouldn't forget what he said. Then Kelvin goes to defeat the monster supporting Sarah. In the next scene, we see the heroes bidding farewell to Kelvin and his group. Before they part ways, Kelvin gives them pendants he crafted himself, telling them they can use them as protective charms. Toya is grateful for the gift and promises the protagonist that, the next time they see each other, the whole group will be stronger. As he watches the hero's ship sail away, he asks Gerard where Lizzie's empire is and, upon receiving his answer, asks him if he thinks they can defeat them. Gerard is surprised that the protagonist remembers such details and replies that yes, they could. Kelvin smiles and says that before that, they still need to fight more monsters in this part of the world. Gerard, clearly excited, looks at Kelvin with admiration, thinking he truly is an incredible man. Phil, having overheard the conversation, gently adds that he's also a kind one. The protagonist is surprised and reveals that the pendants he gave the heroes not only boost their stats, but also have a secret function. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah approaches them and says that a messenger from the guild has come looking for Kelvin. He gets excited, thinking the rice has finally arrived, and explains that because of what they did, the king of the country wants to see them. The scene shifts, and we now see the protagonist and his group standing before the royal castle. The protagonist notes that the place has a Japanese vibe, and Gerard explains that the first king of Torage came from another world, which is why it looks that way. Soon after, the group enters the castle where Tsubaki Fujiwara, the queen of Torage, greets them kindly. Tsubaki thanks them for taking down the bandits and defeating the boss of the Hermit's Cave. She asks them to raise their heads, as she dislikes excessive formality. Tsubaki reveals that under normal circumstances, they would hold a grand celebration, but they cannot because Trison is involved. Still, she wishes to reward them and asks if there's anything they would like. The protagonist responds that he would like permission to purchase a bit of a special crop that can only be found in this region. Since they don't want any material rewards that would tie them down to one place, they prefer instead to fill their stomachs with food. She tells them they can take as much as they want and that they won't have to pay for it. She then reveals that she has prepared a small banquet just for them. Kelvin dives straight into the rice, and upon tasting it, he shouts with joy. He tells us that everyone enjoyed the Japanese food, and he also discovered that Gerard has quite a liking for alcohol. In the next scene, several days have passed, and we see Kelvin getting ready to eat. While doing so, he asks Phil about the others and then praises her for mastering Japanese cuisine. She thanks him and mentions that Queen Tsubaki gave her some books that helped her learn how to cook rice and other Japanese dishes. Then we see that the queen is also in the protagonist's room. Kelvin asks why she came to eat in his quarters, and she replies that it's because of Phil's cooking skills. Immediately afterward, she asks Kelvin to let Phil stay at the castle and also invites him to work in Torage. But the protagonist, very nervous, tells her that Phil doesn't want to stay, and besides, they have to return to Parth. Tsubaki, who is standing very close to him, insists that he should stay and become her personal caretaker. But realizing that she's flirting with him, he gets even more nervous, steps back quickly, and tells her they need to continue their journey. She tells the group they're always welcome in her country, and then leads them to a teleportation portal. There, the protagonist discovers that their IDs already contain permission from the portal administrators to use the portals. He gets angry at Leo for not telling them about it sooner. Finally, the protagonist and his group return to Parth. There, Phil asks Kelvin what their next objective will be. He replies that since they've just returned, today will be a day of rest. He also reveals that he plans to buy a house soon. Later on, the protagonist shows his friends the house he purchased, and they are amazed to see how big it is. Kelvin tells them they can choose their rooms, and Phil, very shyly, asks for the room next to his. Gerard wants to check out the basement because he needs it for training, and Clotho asks to stay in the yard. Now that everyone is happy, the protagonist heads to the house's bathtub and reveals that this was actually the main reason he bought the place. But before he can take his bath, the doorbell rings and he goes to answer it. There, he shows his companions that he decided to hire Luca and her mother Ellie as servants. That night, the protagonist is delighted that he finally got to bathe, and as he lies in bed, he feels a bit nostalgic for the inn's bed. But just as he's trying to sleep, he's interrupted by Melfina, who tells him that she can now be summoned. He uses his magic to summon the goddess, and when he sees her, he's completely captivated by her beauty. The next day, Melfina thanks them for finally letting her try the food prepared by Phil. She tells the protagonist that she's impressed by the mansion he bought, and complains that she couldn't find him since he was no longer staying at the inn. Gerard and Sarah, sitting at the table, ask the protagonist who the beautiful woman next to him is. At that moment, Melfina introduces herself to the rest of the group and tells them she was summoned last night. Gerard confesses that he already knew the protagonist was going to bring another woman into the house and gets flustered. But Melfina corrects him and casually states that she's Kelvin's wife, which makes him panic and scramble to explain that it's not true. Later, during tea time, Melfina wants to reward the protagonist for successfully summoning her. She gifts him the blessing of Melfina, the goddess of reincarnation, which has two benefits. Once a month, it can nullify the damage of a fatal blow, and it also grants him the ability to summon heroes. In the next scene, Melfina trains by sparring against Sarah, while Gerard watches over Luca as they observe the girls fight. Meanwhile, the protagonist, feeling a bit nostalgic, wonders how the heroes are doing. He also reflects on the meaning of the word hero, realizing that even if a hero defeated the Demon King, perhaps that person wasn't truly a hero. Maybe they were actually an S-rank adventurer or even the Beast King of Gone. Finally, we see that the girls' fight has ended, and they praise each other for their incredible power. Gerard, who had been watching the duel, asks why they were taking it so seriously. Sarah explains that they were fighting for the right to sleep next to the protagonist. Later, the girls enjoy a bath together and wonder why Kelvin seems so distracted. Eiffel, who has just arrived, says she thinks it's because of what Melfina told him about the heroes. Hearing this, Melfina walks over to Kelvin and feeds him a piece of chocolate by hand. Kelvin grumbles in protest, surprised that she somehow knows he has a question on his mind. He asks why she needs heroes, and she replies that to answer that, she first needs to explain the situation with the Demon King. Melfina explains that every so often, a Demon King appears in this world in a cyclical manner, and there's no way to prevent it. Not even she knows what they look like. What she does know is that all Demon Kings possess a special ability called Malice, which has two effects. Effect number 1, it multiplies the evil within the user to the point of completely destroying their personality. Effect number 2, it nullifies all damage, essentially turning them into an invincible god. The protagonist, surprised, asks what they must do to defeat the Demon King. Melfina replies that's exactly why they need heroes from other worlds, because they possess powers that are completely different from anyone in this world. That's the reason why the Demon King's invincibility can be neutralized. As he thinks it over, Kelvin remarks that his own attacks should be capable of harming the Demon King too, so he doesn't quite understand why only they are called heroes. Feeling a bit disheartened, he reflects on how, unlike the others, he remembers nothing of his past life. That's why he begins to question whether summoning people and forcing them to become heroes is truly the right thing to do. Hearing this, Melfina suggests that, if he doesn't want to summon people from another world, he could instead summon a reincarnation. She then explains that there are two methods to summon someone from another world: teleportation and reincarnation. If you teleport someone, you bring them into this world alive, but if you reincarnate them, you only summon the soul of someone who has already died. Moreover, another key difference is the amount of magic points required for each method. Reincarnation consumes significantly more MP and is used to summon powerful individuals, while teleportation is meant to bring over heroes. After explaining everything, Melfina asks Kelvin if he wants to try performing a reincarnation. But before he can answer, she tells him to think it through carefully and take his time because he only has one chance. The scene shifts, and now we see everyone gathered in the basement to witness the protagonist perform a reincarnation. But before he begins, he asks Melfina if they can let the person decide how they want to live. After receiving a positive answer, he prepares to cast the spell and begins recalling those he previously summoned. The protagonist replenishes his magic points with a potion that Eiffel gave him and gets ready to begin. Following Melfina's instructions, he informs her that he'll use all but one of his MP to summon a single person. We then see the reincarnation ritual begin, and the protagonist complains that it's taking too long. Melfina explains that it's because the person can't decide what skills they want to have. However, suddenly, Melfina informs him that the person has made their choice, so now he'll be able to meet his reincarnation in person. After a massive burst of magic, the protagonist sees that the person he summoned is a young girl. She introduces herself as Ryo Seiki and is thrilled to see that she's arrived in another world, just like the angel she saw told her she would. The protagonist reveals that he was the one who reincarnated her and apologizes for bringing her without asking. But she starts crying, thanking him for doing it, and then faints while hugging him. Eiffel becomes worried when she sees that Kelvin also collapses onto the floor. That night, Ryo wakes up remembering her final moments before dying and then how she was reincarnated. She gets out of bed and goes outside to feel the world around her. She's incredibly happy to be able to enjoy nature again. Later, the protagonist approaches her and admits that he felt the same way on his first day in this world. But unlike her, he didn't keep his memories. He sacrificed them in exchange for skill points. Ryo is surprised to hear his story as he tells her about all of his adventures. He then gently adds that it's okay if she doesn't want to stay. But Ryo tells him that, in her previous life, she was very sick and couldn't do anything except read adventure novels. That's why, when she died, she felt like her life had been wasted. However, now and thanks to him, she has another chance and she wants to join his party. Seeing how determined she is, Kelvin agrees. He then tells her that everyone in the village says they look so alike that they must be siblings. Ryo lights up with joy She was an only child in her past life and is touched to finally have a brother. However, the protagonist, feeling a bit embarrassed, admits that he wants to change her name because it reminds him of someone he doesn't want to remember. She suggests the name Rian, and he agrees. Then he welcomes her warmly. That night, the protagonist wakes up and discovers that both Ethel and Sarah are sleeping beside him. But then he sees that even Ryan is in his bed and wonders whether this is supposed to be normal. In the next scene, we move to the dark purple forest, where the group is training. Ellie tells the protagonist that she understands why Rian had to come along, but asks why she and Luca are there as well. He replies that it's so they can level up a bit. After all, even if they're maids, it might come in handy in an emergency. However, Luca, visibly worried, says she's never fought a monster before. Kelvin reassures her by explaining that the three of them will stay at the entrance of the dungeon, and thanks to his ability, he can share experience points with them. Sarah, thrilled by the monster hunt, tells him that at this pace, with Gerard and Clotho, they'll be in shape by tomorrow. Then Ellie, Luca, and Ryan hear a strange sound that catches their attention. Melfina and the protagonist explain that the sound means they've leveled up and encourage them to check their stats. The girls follow their instructions and are surprised to see how many levels they'd gained. Suddenly, a loud growl is heard. Ethel informs the protagonist that it's a dark wolf. Kelvin spots the creature approaching and uses his magic to stop it. Then he performs a summoning contract with it. Meanwhile, Ethel uses her skills to alert the protagonist that Erd's group is approaching from behind. When Erd arrives, he's surprised to see the protagonist and his group and asks what they're doing there. Kelvin replies that they're just having a picnic and asks in return what they're doing there since it's not a place they usually visit. The instructor explains that they came to take advantage of an opportunity to reach B rank, and as part of the exam, they have to defeat a series of monsters within a set time limit. In the next scene, Gerard, Clotho, and Sarah return from hunting monsters and tell the protagonist they saw Erd, wondering what he's doing there. Kelvin explains the exam situation to them, and they grow concerned, revealing that there's a problem. Ethel uses her skill to check and discovers that there are no monsters left in the forest. Because of this, the protagonist decides he must return to the city to apologize to Erd. However, Erd tells him there's no need to worry, and that Leo will surely understand. Taking advantage of the moment, and seeing how strong his group is, Erd suggests that the protagonist should take the S-rank exam. Later, we see Rian and Kelvin bathing the dark wolf, now named Alex, who has become their pet. As they do, Kelvin reflects on what Erd told him and starts to feel uneasy, suspecting that Leo might be planning to spring the exam on him unexpectedly. But Ethel and Rian reassure him, reminding him that it's just his first official exam to move up in rank. After finishing Alex's bath, the protagonist discovers that Ryan has a special ability to communicate with animals. In the next scene, a few days go by, and we see how Ryan has really bonded with her wolf, Alex. One night, the protagonist's mansion is surrounded, and he, along with Sarah, Clotho, and Rian, prepares for battle. Kelvin uses the clairvoyance skill he acquired from Ethel to assess the strength of their enemies and realizes they're not that powerful. So even though Sarah and Clotho offer to handle them, he turns to Rian and asks if she and Alex are willing to give it a try. They agree, and the protagonist quickly comes up with a plan to make things easier. Kelvin spends some MP to upgrade the presence detection and clairvoyance skills, helping Rian execute the strategy more effectively. And then he gives her a special sword, which he reforged himself using the remains of Cashel's weapon. The scene shifts, and we see what appears to be the leader of the villains, who wants to attack the protagonist for having captured Kristoff. Then he orders his men to assault the mansion, which Rian prepares to defend. As she defeats the attackers, the protagonist and Sarah observe her closely to evaluate the results of her training. In the end, Rian and Alex manage to defeat the enemies, and the protagonist asks Sarah to go speak with her, since he plans to take care of the remaining enemies still in hiding. He then heads toward the leader, who becomes terrified upon seeing him. The scene changes again, this time to a meeting at the castle of Trison. There, Zell Trison, the emperor of the country, has summoned his people to discuss what happened with Kristoff. Dan Alba, the general of the Steel Knights, reprimands Tristan, saying that his decisions have exposed the country's darkness. This is the reason why Gon, Toraj, and Daramis are forming an alliance. Tristan tries to downplay the situation, but Zell interrupts and sides with Dan. Zell reveals that he tried to distance the country from Kristoff, but it didn't work, and warns them all to be careful if they want to avoid going to war. But Tristan argues that this situation arose because they were the only ones preparing while the other countries remained at peace. He believes the time has come to fulfill their long-held ambition to unify the continent under their rule. Princess Shutora thinks it's a good idea but believes the timing isn't right, as the other nations aren't that weak. However, Asgrad replies that he also supports going to war, as he has personally confirmed that the enemy forces aren't that strong. Moreover, they still have their trump card, the dragons under their control. But Dan opposes the idea of starting a war, which leads Tristan to point out that the vote is currently tied. The final decision, therefore, depends on what General Clive decides, though he's currently absent. Zell agrees with Tristan and orders that Clive be brought in immediately. The scene shifts again to Jin Dalba, who is complaining about how gloomy the Magical Knight's headquarters is. Jin heads to General Clive's room to inform him that the Emperor has requested his presence. Though visibly irritated by the summons, Clive eventually agrees to follow the Emperor's orders. We shift back to the protagonist, who explains that they are currently in the forest at the summit, located southwest of Gon. He tells us that they're searching for an elf village said to be hidden in this area. Suddenly, Eiffel tells the group that she feels as if she's been there before. The protagonist explains it might be because she's a half-elf, and her blood is likely resonating with the place. Sarah is surprised to learn that elves exist in this part of the continent, so Melfina explains that they migrated from the west decades ago. Now they live under the protection of Gon. Following this, Kelvin shares with the group what Leo had recently told him. Leo explained that Tryson denied any involvement with the assassins who attacked him. However, he also reported that neighboring countries had observed military movements near Tryson's borders. While Tryson had never dared to attack them before, they are now gathering troops and buying slaves. Leo suspects that the political climate in Tryson has shifted and that the nation may be preparing for war, possibly seeking to invade another country. That's why he warns the protagonist to be careful, since Tryson will likely come after him again. Leo also informs him that he has a new assignment for him, a request from Leonhart Gon, the Beast King of Gon. He wishes him luck, explaining that this mission will also serve as his S-rank promotion exam. Upon hearing this, the group is excited for Kelvin. Sarah asks him about the royal approval he needs to rise in rank. Kelvin replies that he actually needs 2 royal permits, which is why Leo spoke with Queen Tsubaki, who agreed. Additionally, King Leonhart, having heard about Kelvin's feats, wants to meet him in person. Everyone starts wondering what Leonhart is like, and Melfina explains that he's incredibly strong, and S-rank himself. Suddenly, the group is ambushed by elves, but Kelvin quickly shows them the royal order from King Leonhart. That's when Nelrez, the village elder, appears and apologizes for the attack. He also thanks Kelvin for coming, and upon approaching him, realizes something surprising. Lumel is still alive. Later, the entire group arrives at the elven village. Before getting into the king's request, Kelvin says he wants to talk about what just happened first. The protagonist, seeing that Nelrez mistook Eiffel for Lumel, wants to learn more about her, as it might be a clue to Eiffel's origins. Nelrez explains that 20 years ago, they lived peacefully in the forest until the Fire Dragon King attacked them. He demanded that they hand over the elf who had humiliated him, or he would reduce everything to ashes. But Nelrez admits they had never seen such an elf, and didn't understand the dragon's rage, which led him to slaughter half of the village. Nelrez is saddened that those people died without ever knowing the reason, and he regrets that even he was wounded in that battle. However, Lumel was the only one who stood up to the dragon, asking him to take his fury out on her in exchange for sparing the village. The dragon replied that she was not the one he was looking for, but offered to forget the incident if she agreed to marry him. And since she accepted, he took her away, leaving the rest of the village in peace. But years later, they found Lumel's body in the forest. Since she was dead, they feared the Fire Dragon King might return. That's why they decided to leave the continent in search of new lands. Sarah suggests that since Nelrez mistook Eiffel for Lumel, maybe Lumel was her mother. Gerard adds that, if that were true, then she might also be the daughter of the Dragon King. But Melfina tells them that it's not possible, since half-elves can only be born when a human and an elf have a child. Dragon blood is simply too strong. Eiffel says that even though she doesn't know her past, she's fine because she now has her companions, and they are her new family. They decide to change the subject and talk about the king's request. Nelrez tells the protagonist that there is a barrier in the forest that disorients people, but apparently it doesn't affect monsters. This makes Kelvin think that there must be abilities capable of nullifying barriers. The elder explains that the monsters have come 2 or 3 times and never tried to attack. They were only looking to kidnap the elves. Kelvin becomes worried because monsters usually aren't this organized. Nelrez sadly admits that neither they nor the soldiers of Gon were able to stop the monsters. That's why the protagonist's team tries to cheer him up and promises to protect them. But before that, Kelvin asks for permission to renovate the village so that the monsters won't be able to reach them. At night, we see the monsters approaching the village, guided by a group of soldiers. The commander of the semi-demon army warns his troops to be careful with the noise they're making, as they could be ambushed. He also reveals that with the defeat of Gon's soldiers, General Tristan's plan is ready to move into its most critical phase. The soldiers, in turn, ask where Tristan got the S-rank collars used to control the demons. The commander tells them there's a rumor that he bought them from a merchant who visited the castle. But just as they are reveling in their power, they are suddenly attacked from the shadows. The commander orders his army to take cover, using the monsters as shields. Meanwhile, we see that the attackers are Kelvin and Eiffel, who are positioned atop a rock with her new shadow bow. The protagonist explains that he created this tower as well as a wall around the village using his skill. Nelfina also generated a false fog to conceal the village, and Sarah cast dark magic into the water of the entrance moat. No matter how hard the enemy tries to approach, they won't be able to enter the village. Gerard, on the other hand, was sent to serve as the final line of defense at the village gate. The scene shifts, and we see a soldier from Trison returning to base, reporting that the entire advancing army has been defeated. The sub-commander asks for information about who attacked them, and the soldier explains that it was a group of adventurers so powerful that not even B-rank monsters could stop them, which is why they can't move forward. Deeply concerned, the soldier adds that Unit 5 is currently fighting them and that they may reach this location soon. Upon hearing this, the sub-commander decides to use his secret weapon. Before he can act, Melfina and Rian arrive on the scene, prompting the sub-commander to quickly awaken the Gigant Lord. The monster awakens, and upon seeing its enormous size, Rian becomes visibly excited. Seeing her so thrilled, Melfina asks her and Alex to take care of the monster. They agree and charge at the Gigant Lord, which is an S-rank monster. However, when Rian strikes it with her sword, it has no effect. Realizing her sword is broken, Rian decides to get serious and activates her hero skill called Dual Weapon. She then heads toward the monster's head, wielding the swords forged for her by Kelvin and Will. We're also told that Alex can wield an additional sword, allowing them to launch a 3-sword attack. Finally, Rian and Alex manage to wound the giant, which astonishes the sub-commander. He immediately orders the giant to transform. The giant reveals its true form, becoming a fire demon, but even so, Rian remains confident she can defeat it, as its flames are weaker than Sarah's. Rian repeats her attack, and this time she completely defeats the giant, just like she did with Trison's army. The protagonist proudly watches Rian's growth, but then he's suddenly caught off guard by a direct attack. He manages to protect himself, surprising Clyde and his troops, who didn't expect their strike to fail. The protagonist is excited to face such a powerful new enemy, and Clive, just like him, is thrilled to meet his new favorite elf. Clive asks Eiffel to become his slave and attempts to cast a spell. Kelvin quickly realizes Clive is trying to charm Eiffel and responds with a swift counterattack. Clyde introduces himself and mocks the protagonist, claiming he'll never be able to stand against Trison's general of the Magic Knights. But the protagonist, visibly enraged, yells at him not to lay a single finger on his girl. He then uses his appraisal eye to analyze Clyde and discovers that his stats are focused on a unique skill called Charming Gaze. That's when he realizes Clive is also a reincarnated individual and asks him about it. Clive tells him not to be nosy and is surprised to find out that Kelvin's appraisal eye surpasses even his A-rank camouflage. Kelvin then orders Eiffel to return to the village, since he plans to destroy the tower. Next, he attacks the army of Magic Knights to drive them away. The protagonist gains enough time to create 4 obsidian spears and launches another attack on Clive. Clive manages to stop the attack, so Kelvin tries again, but with the same result. Frustrated, the protagonist unleashes even more attacks, trying to break through the barriers surrounding Clive. But Clive tells him that no magic or weapon can pierce his helix barrier, which destroys everything it touches. However, he's surprised by the resilience of Kelvin's weapons. Kelvin smiles, excited to finally be facing a powerful enemy. Clive, not understanding his attitude, warns him to watch his back. When the protagonist turns around, he realizes that he's been surrounded and must use his obsidian spears to defend himself. Clyde tells him to surrender, thinking that being surrounded gives him the upper hand. But the protagonist just laughs and unleashes a piercing attack that breaks through the helix barrier, leaving Clive visibly worried. Then Kelvin reveals that thanks to his golems, imbued with their own will, he no longer suffers from being outnumbered. He sends them into battle, instructing them not to kill Clive's maids, as he intends to free them from their enchantment. We then see the protagonist engage in direct combat against the general, which begins with an aerial fight. They show each other their most powerful techniques, but when Clive launches an attack, he also ends up hitting his own allies. This angers the protagonist, who accuses Clive of not caring about his comrades, since he treats them as disposable. Clive laughs at the protagonist for worrying about such things and tells him that in this world, he's free because there are no rules. He then admits that, thanks to the power he gained upon reincarnating, he can do whatever he wants. Just like Kelvin, he enjoys the power they've been given and has come to realize that he's addicted to fighting. Kelvin admits that he does get excited about having so much power. However, he believes that if someone only cares about themselves and doesn't care about others, that makes them nothing more than a worm. Clive, annoyed by his words, activates his helix barrier to attack once more. For that reason, the protagonist unleashes his full power. Unfortunately, his weapon breaks in the process, but he still manages to wound his enemy. Clyde goes berserk after being injured and promises to destroy Kelvin using his S-rank magic. Kelvin tells him to go ahead and is stunned to see that the level of power from S-rank magic surpasses even natural disasters. As Clyde prepares his attack, its effects spread everywhere, reaching even the forest and the elves. He presents his ultimate move to the protagonist, Tempest Barrier, which makes Kelvin realize the situation has escalated dangerously. immediately. Kelvin asks Clotho to give him his dark staff Disaster, which he intends to use to finish off his enemy, even if it means destroying the forest. He unleashes his attack, Scythe of Death. Boreas successfully breaking through Clive's spell and wounding him. Clive screams in pain as he sees his legs have been severed and begs the protagonist for mercy, but Kelvin prepares to finish him off. Suddenly, Clive vanishes. A new enemy appears in his place and introduces himself as Tristan Faze, general of the semi-demon army. Tristan reveals that he saved Clive and admits to being the mastermind behind the entire operation against the elves. Upon hearing this, Kelvin tells him that he will have to pay as well, right after handing Clive over. However, Tristan refuses, saying Clive is still useful to him. When he says this, Kelvin pauses for a moment and asks if Clyde is actually a summoned being, which surprises Tristan. Even so, Tristan decides it's time to retreat, admitting that they've lost. The scene shifts, and we see Iphil explaining to Nelruz what happened. Nelruz, upon hearing that their enemies were defeated, orders his people to prepare a feast as a gesture of gratitude. Meanwhile, Melfina, Rian, and Sarah compete to see who is the fastest, as each wants to be the first to receive Kelvin's praise. In the end, Rian invents a new spell and manages to beat the other girls, who congratulate her for her impressive progress. Back in Trison's castle, Clive wakes up in chains. Tristan tells him that he has already healed his legs, but only so he can torture him using the cursed weapons prepared by Gildora. Unlike Clive, another individual who was reincarnated is considered the perfect subject. In the next scene, we see the group enjoying the feast in the village. However, Kelvin keeps his distance from the celebration, prompting Iphil to go to him. He confides in her that he's grateful to have met everyone and promises to use his power to protect them. Iphil tells him she came to show him the item the elder gave her, which once belonged to her mother Lumel. She also confesses that she's happy to have come here, as everyone treats her kindly, and because she finally learned about her origins. Kelvin is happy for her and offers to place in her hair the item that once belonged to her mother. As he does, Iphil thanks him and takes the chance to ask if she can stay by his side forever. The protagonist smiles and says yes. They're then interrupted by their slightly drunk companions, who came looking for them. But suddenly, an elven girl appears to thank the protagonist and gives him a hug. She quickly apologizes for overstepping and decides to introduce herself. To everyone's surprise, she introduces herself as Leon Hartgon, the Beast King. Kelvin asks if she's a girl, but he replies that he's not. He just used an item to change his appearance. Having watched Kelvin's performance during the exam, Leonhart informs him that he has passed and been promoted to rank S. In 4 days, the official promotion ceremony will take place, where Kelvin must face off against 4 other S-rank adventurers. Since it coincides with the national festival, Leonhart advises him to be well prepared. Kelvin is thrilled to hear this, excited at the chance to fight powerful rank S adventurers, and satisfy his hunger for battle.